name is Tanaka Mazivanhanga. I'm an artist printmaker based in London.
And I am Fungai Marima. I'm an artist and printmaker based in London too. Today we're going to be looking at one of our favorite artists. Her name is Louise Bourgeios, and we're going to be looking at one of her print etchings called
My Inner Life, which was made in 2008.
Okay, the reason why we chose this piece was initially we were drawn to it, I suppose, emotionally.
Yeah.
Yeah. By maybe technique. Maybe we recognize the fact that it's an etching and
soft ground, and the fact that it's not a perfect print. And I really enjoyed the fact that her work is always kind of like sometimes a play between landscape and body, which I find very interesting. And it's quite evident in this piece.
Yeah, and the aspect of landscape and the body, kind of looking at how her work is quite autobiographical, and how she uses her personal experiences of being a woman in a male-dominated industry in the time that she was starting off.
A mother.
Yeah.
She does talk a lot about motherhood and femininity.
Yeah. And this piece in particular, it's kind of reflecting what we feel on the inside and it being exposed on the outside with the tubes and and sort of like her imprint onto this artwork actually.
Yeah, which is the background, isn't it?
Yeah.
We were saying before that we like that it's not a perfect print because it's not like a clean etching or like a clean background, and those imprints in the background almost give depth to the print, which is just like a simple line drawing.
Yeah, exactly.
So
which is quite similar to the dry points that she did, which is kind of looking at her life as a mother and a wife, and as well as an artist. And that idea of the imprint, I kind of like the trace. She's kind of leaving a trace of herself, like a physical outward trace of herself onto these prints that she's almost look like tubes and veins.
Yeah, but those tubes are kind of like commenting on her like motherhood, isn't it? And then what we were saying before about the mind and body, the connection between mind and body.
Yeah. I was kind of thinking about how sculptural, though it's a two-dimensional piece, how it sort of reflects to sculptural work, and because it's very physical.
Yeah.
You can almost kind of like feel like you can grab some of these tubes and manipulate them, and the fact that she's actually brought two plates together
because it was just a super large scale print. And then I guess the physicality, let's say that was like in this piece. Is what's it's quite evident, or it relates to both our practices really, that we're physically, our practice or our process rather is physically charged in how we make the work. Well, with me, I spend like hours, painstakingly drawing and tracing the surfaces and the forms and the fragments of the urban landscapes, and you are physically throwing yourself with some of your pieces.
Yeah.
You know, when you're making your soft ground etchings, when you're physically throwing yourself to leave your imprint and document, your life.
Yeah. And that idea of documentation kind of ties into archiving.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's sort of like the way she does with this particular piece, she's archiving her physical self as well as her emotional and inward bodily self.
But that can be said about all her work, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose, but I think like with this one, you've got these strange things coming out of her stomach and strange things that are coming out of the something that looks like a head, you know, and usually like with my work, I archive the boundary of the skin, especially like with the piece that I'm showing. It's a documentation and an archive of the boundary of the body, which is the skin. And with this, she's actually kind of, there's a duality where she's doing both, where she's doing the physical fingerprints, or what look like fingerprints, as well as
the inside.
The inside coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like in terms of your work, I kind of see like similarities in this whole idea of imperfection and line and this whole element of drawing. And I do wonder whether I think the imperfections come from the process, maybe the process of making. What would you say? Like,
I think so, and the fact that also I think I think it's both the process and me, because I could make it into a perfect print, but nothing's really perfect, and I want to capture that essence of the imperfect spaces that I'm documenting. So I think
so with the imperfections, it's kind of like you looking at a particular space or an area, and it's sort of like a reflection of that.
Because these are the forgotten, or the mundane rather.
Right.
The mundane spaces
that we're constantly kind of like ignoring, but we see almost overlooking. Yeah, and that's quite similar to what she's doing here, because we inhabit these bodies, but we don't actually really know what's going on in these bodies, and we take them for granted until something actually goes wrong, until it then reveals itself, quite similar to these tubes and these lines that are coming out of a landscape or a body. So it's almost kind of like a call for it to grab our attention to some of the things that we ignore. Almost, isn't it?
Also to kind of like look after ourselves, right?
And I think that's what I really love about her work, actually, especially her prints, her dry points, is the fact that there's a kindness to her work and an openness and a vulnerability and yet strength too within her work.
Definitely.
That is quite different to her sculptural work, which is the material is like really strong and big and bold, and then you've got like the etchings that are really beautiful, that are talking about her life.
But I think it's what you're saying, like her etchings, they seem kind of like childlike, but they do have like a very powerful feel to them. And I think that's why like you kind of like get drawn into them, because they're quite fun and playful and kind of like childlike, that you kind of like get drawn into them. So
I agree. Okay, we go into your work. What are you showing?
I am showing a piece called Pastel Islands. It's part of a series of 6. They're actually quite smaller than my usual A1 and larger scale pieces. And it was kind of like the first first set of prints that I made as soon as I came back from Ghana. So they were quite influenced from my experience in Ghana for a number of reasons. First, they are quite different from my usual prints because my other prints are usually quite vibrant in color, and these ones are pastel, have a pastel palette. That's because of Ghana. It has like they use a lot of color in their built environment, from the signage, and just kind of like around. So I was like really trying to kind of like communicate that. And also I just really like the fact that Ghana is just rich in history. So when I went to Ghana, I was really interested in looking at the colonial past, mainly looking at the kind of like the slave trade. So I was like going around the slave castles, and I was just really fascinated by the fact that you can still see the marks that are left there. They just have like so much depth, and obviously that's just like layers of history, because it's like, you know, let's say covering up, like if something is like run down or if it's like worn out, you just like cover it up. So it's just like layers and layers of like all this history, all these things, and it's like kind of like starting to peel back, or it's kind of like starting to reveal itself.
Yeah.
So that is like what, well, you know, it's obviously interesting to see that. So with this piece, I think I was trying to also communicate that, to kind of like get that depth, because, you know, usually my lines don't usually, oh sorry, not my lines, usually my work is mostly like line based, you know, like these different layers of lines, and then sometimes I do add depth with the use of like material, or when I play around with the transparency of the paper, like print on the front of the back, and then maybe rubbing, like creating like layers by rubbing in different parts to create that depth. So because I had just got back from Ghana and had this experience of like experiencing like these layers and depths of these spaces, these marks that are left, that's what I was trying to translate with this piece, because most of it is me creating this depth in these like different areas of the prints, which is something that I do on most part, but it's rarely that I make a whole piece that has that much depth, you know. So I feel like it gives a completely different reading to my usual prints. So I think that is what I was actually trying to communicate or capture. Well, not that this piece is talking about the colonial past, like Ghana's colonial past, or about the slave trade. It's not talking about that. That's a completely different body of work. But it's just that energy that I was like trying to communicate, like the depth that's in these spaces that we're around.
And sort of like the interactions both humans have to landscape, and that idea of preservation, and what that does to a space when it now starts to reveal itself. That's really interesting.
And then I obviously used some fabric that I got from Ghana, so that there's there's kind of like a link back to Ghana or back to Africa. You know, so there's a link between, let's say, European cities and then Ghana.
And I suppose that layering that you're talking about in terms of you going to Ghana and experiencing the landscape and the people, and then kind of you taking the fabric or certain elements of that space
To bring
and
it
then
back.
bringing it back and then working
Incorporate
from
it.
that and
Yeah.
getting inspiration from that.
Mm.
You know, so it's those like layers upon
Layers.
layers
Yeah.
that are really, really interesting. And you're still able to actually, although there is quite a lot of meaning and what do you call it? I suppose it's inspiration. There's like this rich inspiration that you're making your work from, but then you're still able to create really playful and colorful
yeah.
pieces.
Yeah.
Is that based off of like you use monoprint in your work?
Yeah.
Would you say that process in terms of the production of the work adds to that element, or you want people to be able to be invited to your work and then realize that this is actually like really rich sort of like subject matter?
Both. Yeah,
Okay,
it's to
yeah.
invite people in, it's to draw people in,
Yeah.
to have a closer look and then inspect, you know, with color, because color always draws people in.
Yeah.
You know, it's to also enliven these banal forms, and I think it's also kind of like it's a preservation of like memories and space, but it's also kind of like to have a sense of belonging in these spaces when I am kind of like, you know, drawing from or experiencing. It's to have a sense of belonging, and also to document, have like a tangible and physical evidence that this space existed or I was here. Because if I don't, I think that's why I'm so drawn to like actually going into the space and drawing and spending like hours drawing and getting all this like essence from that space, is to, you know, document that, to say, to have like a physical evidence that I was here.
Yeah.
You know, that this space existed. Because now with like, with how like the cities are completely changing, it's like you're wiping off all this history and not reusing these spaces, and okay, fair enough, you're creating new spaces or new meanings, new memories, maybe, but you can't really just wipe off all this history. So I think for me, it's what's really important, like in my work, is to have like physical evidence of these different spaces.
So you're almost like archiving.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think I do like that reference of like archiving in my work. It's like
the visual archive.
Which is back to your work, which is like mainly you see your body as an archive.
Which is the body one that I'm showing, and kind of like thinking about the body as an archive and kind of looking at it as a space or a landscape in which memories, ideas, experiences are sort of imprinted onto, and as opposed to an archive like a book or let's say a map or film, I kind of like look from myself and some of the subjects or the topics that I kind of want to talk about through looking at the boundary of the skin and kind of trying to figure out what, let's say, ideas around trauma look like, and then that's with me sort of like falling onto these plates. So body one is actually is part of a series of 3 etchings that I made on soft ground, and they it's a print that I was repeatedly sort of falling onto a zinc plate that had a soft ground on it, and I was interested in almost like the revelation of like this boundary of this archive that I inhabit, like this body. and that's how I was then able to make these prints. And I suppose quite similar to you, that idea of layering. I think I want to reveal like those layers within the skin, so that I can kind of archive different emotions or different experiences that I go through. And my work is, it's self kind of reflective, but I kind of look at my own personal experiences and narratives, and also kind of collective, because skin is kind of the same, but we have our own DNA, isn't it?
Oh yeah, of course.
But although I look at my own work, I kind of then also look at at other people's sort of like stories and narratives to do with the body.
Yeah, which means, you do get then a lot of inspiration from Louise Bourgeios.
Yeah, actually.
Even though you have different ways of approaching
Yeah.
the idea
Yeah.
of body and identity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I feel like my work is always kind of, before this particular series, it was kind of looking at, I was doing like paintings of like myself. They were mostly self-portraits that were kind of looking at commodification of the female body, and kind of looking at female experiences. And I kind of felt like I was missing out on the physicality of it, and I really wanted to experience experience the process of making. And that's when I then decided that, I'm gonna throw. No, I'm not throwing myself. Well, I am.
You are.
Yes. That idea of kind of really experiencing what I was going to be making was quite important.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's an element of performance in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And although I do want to have the finished product almost, I kind of wanted to reflect the process of making. So because I kind of see printmaking and performance to kind of
Hand in hand.
work hand in hand. Even with
Definitely.
you, this idea of traveling and walking to gain and collect information, and then coming back, that's sort of like a whole performance of collecting.
Even the process of making.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. And the process of making within printmaking, actually, it's a whole performance in itself. So yeah, it's quite fascinating. Really fascinating. Yeah, I think
that's it.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah. So we just wanted to highlight Louise Bourgeios.
Yeah.
And just really, she's like a really amazing artist, all-rounder artist. But we felt that it was important for us to talk about her in a printmaking
sense.
Yeah. Printmaking sense, and kind of just let people know that didn't know.
We hope that we'll be printing when we're 90.
Yeah. She's like super cool.
She really is.
Yeah. So thank you
for listening.
Yes, and we are
great.